Hello. So I sort of want to break this video into two parts. One part I want to be talking about my broad perception of the main political parties in crime and justice, and the other parts, don't know which order I'll do it in yet. So I want to talk about my own personal experience and why I have such strong views on this issue. Um, I'll start with my perception of the political parties. Just a kind of disclaimer here. I know that left and right are not monolithic sort of blocks of people. You know, many people support parties because they align with them in a lot of policy areas, but maybe not everything. There's not many people, I mean, at voter level, who agree with parties on absolutely everything. So I'm by no means attacking whole groups of people here, but I have looked at the Labour, Green, Liberal Democrat and Conservative manifestos on the issue of crime and justice. The Brexit Party don't seem to have published their manifesto yet. I can't seem to find it, neither of the SNP. The SNP, being a social democratic party, I imagine they'd very much veer to the left on this. And the Brexit Party, I imagine, would be similar to the Tories. The Daily Telegraph did mention, it says on crime, the party says it will increase police numbers, ensure more visible policing, and focus on combating violent crime, robbery, and burglary rather than enforcing restrictions on free speech. Um, I can see some merit in that because there is a lot of police resources, you know, in so-called someone said something offensive rather than actual violence. Um, Mr. Farage's party plans to tackle the issue of drug dealing, knife crime, and gangs, and to abolish distortive targets and introduce sentence ranges for young offenders to encourage rehabilitation. I need to see more details about that, but it sounds similar to sort of conservative thinking. Most of the parties, certainly both the Tories and Labour, talk about, and I believe the Lib Dems as well, talk about getting more police on the street. That's one of the easiest things to sort of put out there. Oh, more Bobby's on the beat. It's kind of because it's a visual image. People, especially older people, there is a reassuring thing to see police officers on patrol, and not PCSOs, but actual police officers with the power of arrest. And I do think it has an effect. Um, I think Johnson is absolutely right to call for an increase in stop and search. Yes, it's controversial. Yes, it may mean that innocent people have temporary inconvenience. I I think Richard Taylor, the father of Damalola Taylor, hit the nail on the head. He's called for this policy, but he says it needs to be done in a civil way. And the problem is, in the past, it wasn't, where there was institutional racism, so that was an issue. But I think if it's done in a respectful and polite way, and the police feel, they treat people with civility in those situations, then, that would be definitely an important aspect of it. But if there is evidence that it reduces crime, and I believe there is solid evidence pointing to that, then it should absolutely be adopted. Sadiq Khan seems to think that racial sensitivities or pandering to racial sensitivities is more important than public safety. I don't think it is. But anyway, I digress. Right, so what I'm not going to do in this video is get into in-depth academic analysis of the manifesto pledges or policies because it would take too long, and I don't have space on the video. Rather, I want to talk about the broad sort of outlook that the parties have come out with. Now, Labour, Greens, and Lib Dems, predictably, the whole narrative is is about is about the criminals. Basically, it's about there's a lot of focus on rehabilitation, and who's going to argue with that? Rehabilitation sounds good, and it is an important principle. It makes sense not to have a rotating door where criminals are jailed for something and they come out and reoffend. So obviously having a focus on rehabilitation is very important. I've no problem with that as a principle. I've no problem with tackling the root causes of crime. Again, who is really going to argue with that? No one, right? So these are things that most people are going to agree with. Um, but there is a fundamental ideology with the left, and this is plain to see if you look at these manifestos, and it is this: a hostility to the very idea of justice, a hostility to the very idea of judicial punishment. To the Green Party, punishment is a dirty word. They seem to think that crime can be approached as a sort of conflict resolution. They may not use that term, but that seems to be the sort of mentality that they have, whereby, oh well, this is a problem. We'll kind of get to we'll negotiate with criminals. We'll sort of try and find something that accommodates them. The Green Party in particular, and I will focus a lot on the Greens because I think they're the worst example of this, just cannot get it into their heads that for someone who is a long suffering victim of crime, who is being plagued by yobs, who is frightened to leave their own home, the idea that the people doing that shouldn't face punishment, shouldn't face justice, because, oh, justice is punitive, to me is perverse. It is absolutely perverse. Um, and I really do believe that the likes of the Green Party approach crime like it's sort of conflict resolution. They're absolutely the last significant party I would consider when it comes to crime. They're at the absolute bottom of the list because I do not believe that they have a sense of justice. Um, what was notable in all three manifestos is a lot of focus on criminals, not much focus on victims. I'm not going to say it's totally not there, but when the focus is on helping criminals, all their mental health problems and their that's not jail people. Um, it's just clear where the ideology lies. Um, and I think they're not being entirely honest. For example, they say, let's not send people to jail for drug offences which are for personal use. Well, on the surface, that sounds reasonable because that's obviously very different than, someone stabbing a person to death. But I would say, well, let's look at why they're actually in jail. Are they in jail for the drug offence, or are they in jail because they have committed assault as part of their drug habit? Now, if they have committed violent assault, they should be in jail. I get that addiction is a problem. I do. But they still fundamentally made the choice to take an illegal substance outside of cases where there's peer pressure and spiking and so on. And this is the problem with the left when it comes to crime. They put no focus of responsibility whatsoever on the criminal, especially not the Green Party. They'll claim that they do, but you scrutinise their policies, they really don't. Because the Greens, in their 2015 manifesto, actually said that they're against judicial punishment. And there's nothing in their updated manifesto that suggests they've learned from this idiocy. They just don't get it. I mean, that sort of mindset is fine for people who have never been victims of crime. I really believe even, people who've been victims of crime that don't necessarily believe in, the flog them and hang them sort of school of thought, they still want to see justice. I believe that is something that you will find almost 100% unanimously with victims of crime. They want to see something to justice. And what infuriates me about the left is when they talk about retribution. We do not have retribution in the British justice system. So that is just a plain lie. They're just being dishonest about that. We don't have retribution in the British justice system today. So when someone is jailed for a violent assault, that's not retribution, it's justice. And actually, the big problem is in weak sentences. Far too often we see gratuitous damaging crimes, like the young homeless man I mentioned in Blackpool who was attacked by two thugs. Um, and they only got 6 months. It's wrong. Sentencing is a major, major part of justice. Yes, more police on the street for sure, but sentencing is such a critical. aspect of this in terms of public perception, in terms of fairness, and I think it is still massively overlooked. I mean, the Tories talk about tougher sentences, so they have their thinking in the right place. I do want to see evidence of it. I mean, they're the only party that I've seen. I don't know about the Brexit Party because they haven't issued a manifesto yet, but the Tories are the only party that have spoken about tougher sentencing. Now, my question is, when we have had cases of gratuitous, violent, damaging, destructive crime, why is it the Greens and the SNP and, well, the Greens and the Lib Dems and Labour cannot grasp that people feel totally disillusioned by that? Why can't they understand that? Because I think they're in their own little echo chamber. They believe that their approach will reduce crime. But how can you even tackle the issue of crime and justice if you do not understand victims of crime? The Green Party are utterly ignorant about victims of crime. The Green Party are utterly ignorant about what people want to see. And if you support the Green Party and you've been a victim of crime, it's not up to me to tell you how to vote. But seriously, look at their ideology, look at their attitude to crime, and ask yourself, are you really happy with how they approach the people who have put you through your ordeal? I mean, to me, the idea that a young family who's suffering abuse from jobs, that the Green Party tell them, oh, well, the punishment's punitive, so let's just counsel the criminals. It's it's not only downright insulting, it's bloody dangerous, actually, because it sends out the message to the criminal that they're not responsible for their own actions. Um, so I really think people who have this mentality, who immediately get into this reactionary sort of sense of, oh, well, punishment is punitive, like when they have a knee-jerk reaction to the idea of judicial punishment, I think that it's strongly possible they've never been a victim of serious crime. They may have, had something stolen at one point, but anyone who has had, been through that sort of experience where you go through the mental anguish, the anxiety, the stress, and the fear of being plagued by gangs, for example, um, will know how powerful the desire for justice is. And the likes of the Green Party just don't grasp it. They just don't understand it. They lack empathy. They actually lack empathy. They do not understand what where that anger lies. Or they'll say that they do, but if they have any sense of it, they certainly don't respect it. Um, so I'll be quite honest. I hate the left's attitude to crime. I hate it. I hate the, just the lack of understanding and the lack of empathy for the need for justice. For it comes down to a basic principle of fairness. If you hurt society, you pay a price. Societies have rules, consequences that we're all subject to, and we should be. I mean, if I go, if I decide to urinate in front of a primary school, I'm going to be arrested, and with good reason. But the Greens just can't seem to get it into their heads that if a thug assaults someone, if a gang beat up an innocent victim, the Green attitude is, oh, these poor, disadvantaged young men, why are they so angry? Let's listen to them. Let's counsel them. They cannot grasp that that sort of cowardly, bullying, thug mentality should result in lengthy prison sentences. They cannot grasp that those sort of people are dangerous. I mean, someone who's going to violently assault a stranger is a dangerous person. The Greens don't understand that. Or they'll say, oh, it's a mental health problem, so let's feel sorry for them. And then these sort of leftists get worked up if you call them criminal sympathizers. But what else can you call such a person? If you are promoting the rights of the criminal over the victim, you are a criminal sympathizer. I think it's perfectly compatible to believe in due process, to believe in humane conditions inside. It's not a contradiction to believe in those things whilst demanding real justice. I think we need much more accountability from weak judges. I think the public should be far more empowered in the criminal justice system. I think the Tories have proposed, for example, that victims of crime would be able to attend parole boards. I welcome that. There are several things need to happen in this country when it comes to law and order. There must be an improvement in the sentencing system because right now it's just there's no public confidence. Um, we must have a fundamental change of ideology, a change of attitudes, in that crime should be unacceptable. I think what's happened in the last couple of decades is it's become acceptable, not to the majority of people, but too many of the powers that be, judges, legislators, because they've put the focus on the needs of criminals, they've lost a fundamental sense of fairness. I think that is a problem. A fundamental sense of fairness has been utterly lost from our justice system. And it's something the Greens and the Lib Dems fail to understand. And while I'm talking about the Lib Dems, they have a particular policy about having a judicial review for women offenders. Now, I get that you may have women offenders, for example, who have escaped from domestic violence. And I think that is definitely something that needs to be addressed. But this is a fundamental feminist hypocrisy that is embodied by their leader right now, Joe Swinson, that, oh, let's demand equality, but not when it comes to justice. So why should a violent woman be given a more lenient sentence than a violent man because she may have a difficult background? What if the violent man had an abusive mother? Does that mean that, that's a mitigating factor in his sentence? The vast majority of inmates are men, so why there's this need? The them seem to think there should be special treatment for women offenders. Yes, let's look at domestic violence. Let's look at the issues around that. But again, this is a bit like sort of talking about poverty and crime. Because some women offenders may have come from domestic violence backgrounds, most women who've been survivors of domestic violence don't resort to crime. So it's a bit like when the left blame poverty. They say, oh, it's because of poverty. Well, that's smearing all poor people. What the left just don't grasp is that criminals have responsibility for their own behaviour. So, for example, a woman who's been a victim of domestic violence, I have sympathy there. But if she then, commits violent assault against a stranger, that's where the sympathy ends, and she has to be punished for that. I just think that what the left don't grasp when it comes to crime is the basic sense of fairness. Action, consequence. They don't understand that. And it sickens me, the attitude that they have to this. Really sickens me, and it pisses me right off. Um, Final few words. The reason I have such my phone's going. Christian, I'm making a video. Just hold a second. I'm in the middle of uploading a video. Just hold. Wasn't going to restart all of this. Yeah. So I'll talk about my own experience in another video.